Hi there. My name is Mabel, and I'm 54 years old. For the past 30 years, I've poured my heart and soul into building something from nothing. What started as a teenage girl washing dishes has become my pride and joy. Nonna's Kitchen, my little Italian restaurant in downtown Portland, isn't just a business. It's home. It's where families gather, where first dates happen, where celebrations come alive. My son David recently married a woman named Jessica, and I've been trying my hardest to welcome her into our family. But sometimes, no matter how much love you offer people, show you exactly who they are. And when they do, you better believe them. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your city in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happened when family loyalty met a reality check. Let me take you back to where this all began. I was 16 when I first stepped into the kitchen of Murphy's Diner, nervous and desperate for work. My hands shook as I scrubbed endless piles of greasy plates, but I knew this was my shot at independence. While my classmates were at football games and parties, I spent Friday nights elbow deep in dishwater, learning the rhythm of a working kitchen. The older cooks took pity on me, teaching me how to crack eggs without breaking the yolk and flip pancakes without burning them. Those lessons became the foundation of everything I am today. After high school, I enrolled in culinary school, where I met the love of my life, Tony Rodriguez. He had the most infectious laugh and could make marinara sauce that would bring tears to your eyes. We were both broke students sharing textbooks and splitting ramen noodles for dinner. But we had bigger dreams. His grandmother had immigrated from Sicily with a collection of recipes written on index cards, stained with decades of love and use. She taught us that food isn't just nourishment, it's connection, memory and tradition all rolled into one. 25 years ago, Tony and I scraped together every penny we had and opened Nonna's Kitchen. The building was a disaster, with peeling paint and a kitchen that barely passed inspection. But we saw potential. We painted walls until our backs ached, installed equipment ourselves, and created a menu that honored both our families' traditions. The first year was brutal, working 18-hour days and wondering if we'd make rent. But slowly, our little restaurant found its place in the neighborhood. Our customers became family. Mrs. Patterson brought her grandchildren for Sunday breakfast every week for 15 years. The high school drama club held their cast parties in our back room. Young couples got engaged over our tiramisu, then brought their babies for their first solid meal. Tony and I were living our dream, building something bigger than ourselves. When David was born, he practically grew up in that kitchen. He'd sit in his high chair while I prepped vegetables, his tiny hands reaching for everything within grasp. As he got older, he helped fold napkins, cleared tables, and learned that honest work has dignity. Tony and I wanted him to understand that serving others isn't beneath anyone, it's an honor. 5 years ago, My world changed forever when Tony lost his battle with pancreatic cancer. Those final months were devastating, watching the strongest man I knew fade away. But even in his hospital bed, he made me promise to keep the restaurant going. Nonna's recipes need to live on, he whispered during one of our last conversations. The neighborhood needs this place. So I did what any grieving widow would do. I threw myself into work, determined to honor his memory through every plate we served. David grew into a compassionate young man who understood the value of hard work. When he brought Jessica home 2 years ago, I was thrilled to meet the woman who'd captured my son's heart. She was undeniably beautiful, well-educated, and came from a prominent family across town. But within minutes of meeting her, tiny alarm bells started ringing in my head. She walked through my restaurant like she was touring a museum, pointing out the outdated booths and questioning why we didn't have valet parking. When I offered her a sample of our signature lasagna, she took one polite bite and commented that it was interesting in a tone that suggested it was anything but. Over the following months, I witnessed Jessica's true character emerge in small, telling moments. During family dinners out, she'd send food back for the most ridiculous reasons. A steak wasn't the exact temperature she wanted. Soup was too hot, then too cold. Salads had too much dressing or not enough. What bothered me most wasn't her pickiness, but how she treated the servers. She'd snap her fingers to get their attention, never said please or thank you, and acted like they were invisible unless she needed something. David would sit there, looking uncomfortable, but never said a word. When I gently suggested that service workers deserved respect, Jessica laughed it off, saying I was too sensitive because of my background. That comment stung more than she probably intended. My background. You mean working my way up from nothing and treating every person with dignity? The wedding planning was a nightmare. Jessica insisted on an upscale venue downtown instead of holding the reception at our restaurant, which had hosted dozens of family celebrations over the years. She hired a wedding planner who spoke to me like I was the help, not the groom's mother. During the reception, I watched Jessica pose for photos, while completely ignoring my side of the family. My elderly aunts, who had traveled from 3 states away, sat at tables in the back while Jessica's sorority friends occupied the premium spots near the head table. After the wedding, I made countless attempts to build a relationship with my new daughter-in-law. I invited her to cook with me, offering to teach her Tony's grandmother's secret sauce recipe that had been passed down for generations. I don't really do cooking, she replied, not even looking up from her phone. I suggested lunch dates at nice restaurants around town, thinking neutral territory might help us connect. She'd show up late, spend most of the meal texting, and find fault with everything from the service to the decor. The breaking point came 3 months ago during a family dinner at an upscale bistro downtown. Our server was clearly nervous, but trying her best. When she accidentally brought Jessica regular coffee instead of decaf, Jessica exploded. Are you serious right now? I specifically said decaf. Do you not speak English? The poor girl's face crumpled as she apologized profusely, and rushed to fix the mistake. I watched my son shrink into his seat while his wife berated a teenager who was probably working her first job. That night, I made a decision. I would plan one final family gathering, a Sunday dinner at Nonna's kitchen when we were closed to the public. I'd invite all the relatives who'd helped build our restaurant, prepare Jessica's favorite dishes according to David's suggestions, and give our relationship one last genuine chance. If she couldn't find it in her heart to appreciate the love and effort behind a home-cooked meal surrounded by family, then I'd know exactly where I stood. I spent the entire week preparing for what I hoped would be a breakthrough dinner. I called my sisters, David's cousins, and the aunts and uncles, who'd painted walls and hung pictures when we first opened. Everyone was excited to meet Jessica properly and welcome her into our extended family. I planned the menu carefully, asking David about her preferences and making sure to include dishes that weren't too heavy on garlic or spice. Saturday morning, I arrived at the restaurant at dawn, even though we were closed. Maria, my head server, who'd been with us for 15 years, came in to help with the preparation. We made fresh pasta from scratch, rolling each sheet by hand, the way Tony's grandmother had taught us. Giuseppe, our head cook, arrived with arms full of fresh basil and tomatoes from his garden. These weren't just employees, they were family, and they understood how important this dinner was to me. Mrs. Mabel, Maria said as we arranged antipasto platters. Are you sure about this? You remember what happened at the Moretti wedding when Jessica complained about everything? I did remember. Jessica had loudly announced that the catered food was peasant cuisine and suggested they should have hired a real chef. But I was determined to believe that, in our intimate family setting, surrounded by love and tradition, she might show a different side. Sunday arrived with perfect October weather. I decorated our private dining room with family photos spanning 3 generations, fresh flowers from the farmer's market, and candles that cast a warm glow over everything. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one Tony always said, brought out my eyes, and spent extra time on my hair and makeup. This was my olive branch, my final attempt at peace. David arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the nervous smile he'd had since childhood, when he wasn't sure how things would go. "Mom, thank you for doing this," he said, hugging me tight. "I know Jessica can be particular, but she really does want to fit in." I squeezed his hand and assured him that all I wanted was for our family to be complete. Jessica arrived 30 minutes late, which I tried not to take personally. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month, and her first words were complaints about the lack of valet parking. "I had to walk 3 blocks in heels," she announced to the room, as if this was an impossible hardship. My 80-year-old Aunt Rose looked confused since she'd walked those same 3 blocks using a cane. The evening started awkwardly, but I remained hopeful. I served the antipasto course myself, explaining the provenance of each item. The olives came from a family farm in California, the prosciutto from a specialty shop that had supplied us for 20 years. Jessica took a single bite of the bruschetta I'd spent hours perfecting and announced loudly, "This is way too salty. Don't you people taste your food before serving it?" The room fell silent. Uncle Frank, who'd helped install our first industrial oven, looked like he'd been slapped. Cousin Marie, who was visiting from Chicago, raised her eyebrows but said nothing. I forced a smile and offered to bring something else, maybe some cheese and crackers that would be less seasoned. "Actually," Jessica replied, "maybe we should just order pizza from somewhere that knows what they're doing." David's face turned red with embarrassment, but he still didn't speak up. My sister Angela, who'd driven 2 hours to be here, finally broke the tension by asking Jessica about her job in marketing. But Jessica was already checking her phone, scrolling through social media, while completely ignoring the conversation around her. When I brought out the main course, osso buco, that had been braising since early morning, Jessica took one look and declared it too rustic for her taste. "What does that even mean?" asked my nephew Tony, named after his grandfather. Jessica rolled her eyes and explained that she was used to refined dining experiences, and this felt like playing house. The insult cut deep because this wasn't playing anything. This was my life's work, my heritage, my love made tangible through food and hospitality. I excused myself to the kitchen, where Giuseppe found me leaning against the prep counter, fighting back tears. "That woman has no soul," he said in his heavily accented English. Mr. Tony would not tolerate such disrespect in his house. He was right. Tony would have politely but firmly asked Jessica to leave if she couldn't appreciate the effort and love that went into every dish. When I returned to the dining room with dessert tiramisu made from Tony's mother's recipe, Jessica was explaining to my relatives why ethnic food was so heavy and how she preferred lighter, more sophisticated cuisine. My cousin Joe, a retired construction worker who'd helped build our dining room addition, looked ready to say something that would definitely end badly. The final straw came when Jessica stood up abruptly and announced she was leaving to find somewhere with actual standards. She suggested that David join her for real food at the new fusion restaurant downtown. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as family members who'd driven hours to meet her watched this stunning display of disrespect. David finally found his voice quietly asking Jessica to sit back down and apologize. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Apologize for what?" "For having taste." Then she gathered her purse, kissed David's cheek like nothing had happened, and walked out, leaving the rest of us staring at each other in disbelief. That night, after my family helped clean up and offered dozens of supportive hugs, I lay in bed, wondering where I'd gone wrong. Had I been too hopeful, too naive? David called the next morning to apologize for Jessica's behavior, but his words felt hollow. "She's just not used to big family dinners," he explained. "Her family is more formal." Formal was one thing. Cruel was something else entirely. 3 days later, Jessica returned to Nonna's kitchen during our busy Tuesday lunch rush, bringing 3 of her well-dressed friends along for what I can only assume was intended as a performance. I was in my back office wrestling with supplier invoices and trying to figure out how to absorb a 20% increase in produce costs without raising menu prices. Through the thin walls, I could hear the normal sounds of a successful lunch service, sizzling pans, friendly chatter, and the comfortable rhythm of a kitchen that ran like clockwork. Maria seated Jessica's group at table 12, our best spot near the window, with a view of the bustling street outside. I heard Jessica's voice immediately louder than necessary and dripping with disdain. "This table is sticky," she announced. "And look at these water spots on the silverware. Don't you people clean anything properly?" From my office, I listened as Maria politely offered to move them to a different table and bring fresh silverware. Jessica's response was to sigh dramatically and declare that this level of service wouldn't be tolerated at decent establishments. Her friends murmured uncomfortable agreement, clearly embarrassed, but unwilling to contradict their host. The lunch order started reasonably enough. Jessica ordered our most expensive entree, the seafood risotto that took 30 minutes to prepare properly. But when the appetizer course arrived perfectly prepared, arancini with Maria's homemade marinara sauce, Jessica took one bite and pushed the plate away with disgust. "This is completely inedible," she declared loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear. "The rice is overcooked and the sauce tastes like it came from a jar." Maria, who'd been serving customers with grace and professionalism for 15 years, offered to replace the dish immediately. "Actually," Jessica replied, "I want a different server. You're clearly not trained to handle customers properly." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. I watched through my office window as this woman, who'd worked double shifts to support her 3 children after her husband's accident, stood frozen with shock and humiliation. Our backup server, 19-year-old Ashley, who was working her way through community college, took over the table with nervous energy. She brought replacement appetizers that Jessica sampled briefly before declaring equally terrible. By now, other customers were starting to stare, regular patrons who'd been coming to Nonna's kitchen for years, looking confused and offended by the commotion. Jessica's voice continued to rise as she explained to her increasingly uncomfortable friends why places like this were exactly what's wrong with the restaurant industry. She complained that the lighting was depressing, the music was outdated, and the whole atmosphere felt like eating in someone's basement. Each criticism felt like a personal attack on everything Tony and I had built together. When the main course arrived, Jessica didn't even taste it before pushing it away. "This looks absolutely disgusting," she announced. "Take it back and remove it from our bill. This is the worst dining experience I have ever had." Ashley, near tears, explained that she needed management approval for such a large compensation, which only made Jessica angrier. "Then get me your manager," Jessica screamed, her voice echoing through the now silent dining room. "This is completely unacceptable. I want to speak to whoever's in charge of this disaster." Every conversation in the restaurant stopped. Forks hung suspended halfway to mouths as 30 customers turned to stare at the source of the commotion. Ashley hurried to the kitchen, where Giuseppe was ready to march into the dining room and handle the situation in his own direct way. "Let me talk to her," he growled in broken English. "She needs to learn respect." But Maria, despite her own humiliation, stopped him. "Mrs. Mabel needs to handle this herself." she said quietly. This is about more than just a difficult customer. Meanwhile, Jessica's tirade continued to escalate. She stood up from her chair, addressing the entire restaurant, like she was giving a speech. I want the owner, she shouted. I'm going to shut this pathetic excuse for a restaurant down. My father's law firm will investigate every health code violation in this dump. Her friends looked mortified, quietly suggesting they should leave, but Jessica was beyond reason now. She threatened to destroy us online, claiming she knew food critics who would write scathing reviews. She promised to report us to the health department, the business bureau, and anyone else who would listen. This place wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real city, she declared. It's exactly the kind of amateur operation that gives family restaurants a bad name. In my office, I sat perfectly still, listening to Jessica systematically attack everything Tony and I had sacrificed to build. This wasn't just criticism of our food or service. This was an assault on our life's work, our legacy, and the livelihood of every person who worked here. My hands trembled as I realized that this woman, who was supposed to be family, was trying to destroy the very foundation of our lives. Maria appeared in my doorway, her face pale but determined. Mrs. Mabel, she said quietly, your daughter-in-law is demanding to see the owner. She's threatening to ruin us. Behind her, I could see Giuseppe pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, and Ashley wiping tears from her eyes as she hid behind the coffee station. I stood up slowly, removing my apron and checking my reflection in the small mirror beside my desk. My heart was pounding, but my resolve was absolute. This had gone far enough. I walked through the kitchen past my loyal staff, who'd been humiliated and threatened, and into the dining room where Jessica was still performing for an audience of shocked customers. She didn't recognize me immediately, since she'd only seen me in my kitchen clothes and apron. I approached her table calmly, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Jessica was still ranting about unprofessional management and substandard establishments when she finally noticed me standing beside her chair. Excuse me, she said impatiently. I'm waiting for the owner. Are you another server? The dining room held its collective breath as I looked directly into her eyes and said, I'm Mabel Rodriguez, owner of Nonna's Kitchen. You wanted to see me. The transformation on Jessica's face was instantaneous and devastating. The color drained from her cheeks as she realized that the woman she'd been demanding to see was standing right in front of her, having heard every cruel word. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to stammer, I didn't know. This is all a misunderstanding. Really? I replied, my voice calm but carrying 30 years of quiet authority. Because it sounded very clear to me. You called my restaurant a pathetic dump, threatened my staff, and promised to destroy the business I've spent my entire adult life building. Which part was the misunderstanding? Jessica's friends immediately began apologizing, offering to pay their bill and leave quietly. They clearly understood the magnitude of what had just happened and wanted no part of the fallout. But Jessica, even faced with complete humiliation, tried to maintain some dignity. Look, we're family, she said desperately. This whole thing got blown out of proportion. I was just trying to help you improve your standards. Help me? I asked, genuinely curious about her logic. By screaming at my staff, by insulting customers who've been loyal to this restaurant longer than you've lived in this city, by threatening to shut down a business that employs 15 people and serves hundreds of families every week. My voice never rose, but every word carried the weight of absolute conviction. I gestured toward Maria, who was watching from the kitchen doorway. That woman you called incompetent has been serving our customers with grace and professionalism for 15 years. She's raising 3 children alone after her husband was injured in a construction accident. She's never missed a shift, never complained about difficult customers, and treats every person who walks through that door like they matter. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she stood taller, dignity restored. And Giuseppe, I continued, nodding toward our head cook, came here from Italy with nothing but his grandmother's recipes and a dream of honest work. He's trained half the young cooks in this neighborhood, and his pasta sauce has comforted thousands of people through celebrations and sorrows. Giuseppe nodded solemnly, his earlier anger replaced with quiet pride. Jessica tried one more desperate tactic, playing the victim. You've never liked me from the beginning. This is just a personal attack disguised as business. Her voice cracked slightly, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. This isn't personal, Jessica. This is about basic human decency. It's about understanding that the people who serve you food, clean your table, and try to make your experience pleasant are human beings who deserve respect. I paused, letting the weight of that truth settle over the still, silent dining room. I'm going to ask you and your friends to settle your bill and leave. And Jessica, if you ever return to my restaurant, I expect you to treat my staff and customers with the same respect you'd want for yourself. The finality in my voice left no room for argument or negotiation. Jessica stood up shakily, fumbling for her wallet, while her friends hurried to gather their belongings. As they prepared to leave, she made one final threat. David is going to hear about this. You just threw your own family out of your restaurant. Her voice was weak now, lacking the venom she'd displayed earlier. Please, I replied calmly. Make sure you tell him exactly what happened here today. Don't leave out a single detail. As Jessica and her mortified friends headed for the door, something unexpected happened. The entire restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause. Our regular customers who'd watched the drama unfold were showing their support for our staff and our values. Mrs. Patterson, our longtime Sunday breakfast regular, approached me with tears in her eyes. Mabel, honey, that was the most graceful handling of an ugly situation I've ever witnessed. That young woman needed to learn that lesson. Other customers nodded in agreement, sharing their own stories about witnessing Jessica's behavior at restaurants throughout the city. David called that evening just as I was reviewing the day's receipts and trying to process what had happened. Jessica had already given him her version of events, painting herself as the victim of an unprovoked attack by his unreasonable mother. Her story involved being ambushed and publicly humiliated for simply trying to provide constructive feedback. I listened patiently to David's confused and hurt questions, then calmly recounted exactly what had occurred. I didn't embellish or editorialize, just stated the facts as they'd unfolded in front of 30 witnesses. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom," David finally said, his voice small and ashamed. "I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I've been watching Jessica treat people badly for months, hoping it would get better, telling myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed. I should have stood up to her after that first family dinner. I should have protected you and the restaurant." His words carried the weight of genuine remorse and the pain of recognizing his own complicity. A week later, David showed up at the restaurant during our slow afternoon period, wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of his usual business attire. Without being asked, he tied on an apron and started helping in the kitchen, falling back into the rhythms he'd learned as a teenager. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, peeling vegetables and stirring sauces until he finally found the words he needed to say. "I gave Jessica an ultimatum," he said quietly, not looking up from the onions he was dicing. "Either she gets therapy and makes real changes, or our marriage is over. I can't live with someone who treats other people like they're beneath her." His voice was steady but sad, the tone of a man who'd been forced to confront some difficult truths about the person he'd chosen to love. Jessica initially refused the therapy suggestion, claiming she didn't need professional help to deal with her interfering mother-in-law. But when David moved back into his old apartment and made it clear he was serious about the ultimatum, she reluctantly agreed to counseling. The process was slow and often painful, requiring Jessica to examine the entitled attitudes she'd developed over a lifetime of privilege. Months of therapy revealed that Jessica's behavior stemmed from deep insecurities about measuring up to David's accomplished, close-knit family. She'd grown up in a household where worth was measured by material success and social status, where treating service workers poorly was normalized, and where admitting weakness was seen as failure. Her cruelty had been a defense mechanism, a way of maintaining superiority when she felt threatened by the genuine warmth and connection she saw in our family. The breakthrough came 6 months after the restaurant incident, when Jessica appeared at Nonna's kitchen on a quiet Tuesday evening. She waited until we were nearly empty, then approached me with obvious nervousness and genuine remorse in her eyes. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said, using my proper name for the first time, "I owe you and your staff a sincere apology for my inexcusable behavior." What followed was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. Jessica admitted that she'd been intimidated by our family's closeness and had lashed out from a place of insecurity rather than malice. She apologized individually to Maria Giuseppe and Ashley, acknowledging the hurt she'd caused and the professionalism they'd maintained despite her attacks. Her words felt genuine, backed by months of difficult self-examination and real therapeutic work. As part of her commitment to change, Jessica began volunteering at a local food bank, working directly with families experiencing food insecurity. The experience opened her eyes to struggles she'd never imagined and taught her about the dignity that exists in all honest work. She learned to appreciate the skill and dedication required to run a successful restaurant, and slowly began to understand what Nonna's kitchen really represented to our community. The relationship between Jessica and me didn't transform overnight, but it evolved steadily through shared volunteer work and small acts of mutual respect. She proved her sincerity by actions rather than words, showing up consistently and treating everyone she encountered with kindness and consideration. David watched this gradual change with relief and growing hope that his marriage might survive this crisis. One evening, almost a year after the confrontation, Jessica asked if I would teach her to make Tony's grandmother's marinara sauce. We stood side by side in the Nonna's kitchen as I guided her through the careful balance of tomatoes, herbs, and thyme that creates something transcendent from simple ingredients. Her hands were clumsy at first, unused to the intuitive cooking that comes from years of practice. But her attention was complete and respectful. "I never understood," she said quietly, as we stirred the simmering sauce, "that food could be love made visible. I thought expensive meant better, complicated meant superior. I never realized that the most profound things often look simple on the surface." As we worked together, I saw glimpses of the woman David had fallen in love with, the person who'd been buried under years of defensive superiority and learned disdain. Standing in my kitchen that night, teaching my daughter-in-law a recipe that had been passed down through 3 generations, I realized that sometimes the most important lessons come through conflict rather than comfort. Jessica had needed to face the consequences of her actions before she could grow beyond them. Our confrontation hadn't destroyed our relationship. It had cleared the ground for building something authentic and lasting. The ultimate lesson I learned through this painful experience is that respect, like the perfect marinara sauce, can't be rushed or faked. It requires genuine ingredients, careful attention, and time to develop properly. You can't demand respect through volume or threats. You can only earn it through consistent actions and authentic character. Sometimes, protecting what matters most means having difficult conversations with people we love, even when those conversations feel impossible. Looking back, I'm grateful for that terrible Tuesday lunch when Jessica showed her true colors so completely that change became inevitable. If I'd continued to enable her behavior in the name of keeping peace, she never would have been forced to confront the harm she was causing. My staff would have continued to suffer her abuse, and David would have remained trapped in a marriage built on avoidance rather than honesty. Today, Jessica and I work together regularly at the food bank, and she's become a genuinely valuable member of our family. She still has moments of struggle times when her old patterns try to resurface, but she's developed the self-awareness to catch herself and make better choices. David seems lighter now, no longer carrying the burden of constant damage control and apology. As I finish this story, I'm back in my kitchen at Nonna's kitchen, surrounded by the sounds and smells that have defined my adult life. The evening rush is winding down, and tomorrow we'll start again with fresh ingredients and renewed hope. Respect, I've learned, is like seasoning in cooking. You can't fake it, and when it's missing, everyone notices. But when it's present, It elevates everything it touches, turning simple ingredients into something nourishing and memorable. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member whose behavior was hurting others? How did you handle a situation where keeping peace meant enabling harmful actions? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life family experiences. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries, even with people we love. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that sometimes the kindest thing we can do is refuse to accept unkindness from others. Until next time, may your tables be surrounded by people who appreciate both the food and the love that created it.